So, imagine this. You're flying a jet, watching your formation, checking your fuel, monitoring the air picture, you're keeping an eye on the target timing, you're listening to AWACS and the rest of the package, you're managing the threat picture, you're thinking about the next steer point, you're watching your wingman, and you're trying to make decisions that keep the mission moving. If that sounds like a lot, that's because it is. And if you try to do that all by yourself, you're not being a strong flight lead. You're becoming a bottleneck. And that is why delegation is not optional. Delegation is not about doing less. It's not about dumping tasks on your wingman. And it's definitely not about giving away responsibility. Delegation is how a flight lead turns individual pilots into a formation. Because your flight is not just 4 aircraft flying in roughly the same direction, your flight is your weapon. And if you want to use that weapon properly, you need to use all of it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Wildman 31st channel. Before we begin, I would like to thank everyone who has subscribed to my channel over the past period. Your support means a lot to me and I love to see the channel grow. I especially want to express my thanks to Prime of Aviation Plus and Fiscus of Fiscus Fighties for supporting my content on their channels. I'm humbled by your praise. Today it's time for Flight Lead Fundamentals Part 6 and we're going to talk about delegation. Leading a 4-ship gives you 4 jets, but more importantly, it gives you 4 radars, 4 RWRs, 4 HSDs, 4 fuel states, 4 sets of eyes, and, most importantly, 4 brains. If the flight lead is the only one building the picture, most of that capacity is being wasted. You may have 3 other pilots in the flight, but functionally, you're still flying alone. That is one of the classic mistakes new flight leads make. They think being lead means they have to control everything personally. They have to see everything, know everything, decide everything, and fix everything. But that's not leadership. That's task saturation waiting to happen. A good flight lead owns the plan, but he does not have to personally execute every part of it. That's the difference. You do not delegate responsibility, you delegate tasks. The flight lead remains responsible for the mission, the formation, the timing, the priorities, and the outcome. But within that responsibility, he uses his flight. He gives people meaningful jobs, he gives them clear expectations, and then he verifies the things that matter. That is delegation. The first reason to delegate is simple: workload. There's only so much mental bandwidth one pilot has. At some point, if you try to track every detail yourself, something will fall out of your scan. Maybe it's fuel, maybe it's timing, maybe it's a wingman who's slowly drifting out of position. Maybe it's a thread that just came alive. But when it happens, you're no longer ahead of the flight. You're catching up. Delegation helps prevent that. You can assign someone to monitor fuel. You can have your element lead keep track of the air picture on one side. And you can ask your wingman to watch one threat axis. None of that means the flight lead stops caring about those things. It means he is no longer the only one carrying them. And that matters because if you only start delegating after you're already saturated, you've waited too long. Delegation should be part of the plan, not an emergency reaction to chaos. The second reason to delegate is situational awareness. This is where delegation becomes more than just workload management. Because delegation is not only, you do this so I have less to do. It's also, you look at something different so the flight sees more than I could ever see alone. That's a big difference. A good 4-ship does not have one person with situational awareness and 3 people waiting for instructions. A good 4-ship builds shared situational awareness, as we've discussed before. Lead may be focused on the attack timeline and the target area. 2 may be watching formation and immediate support. 3 may be monitoring the northern threat axis. 4 may be keeping track of fuel trends and trailer groups. And when you structure it that way, the flight is no longer dependent on one person's scan. The picture is distributed. But shared situational awareness does not happen automatically. You cannot just brief everybody keep SA and expect that to work. That's too vague. People need to know what they are responsible for. 3. Monitor the northern threat axis. 2. Call if you lose visual, etc. Those are useful tasks. They are clear, they're limited, and they help the flight build a better picture. If you're the only one with SA, your flight does not have SA. You do. And in a 4-ship, you cannot be the only one with situational awareness. It must be shared. The third reason to delegate is combat power, or better, increased combat power. This is where a flight lead starts to turn 4 aircraft into a real tactical tool. A 4-ship is not powerful simply because it has 4 jets. It's powerful because those 4 jets can be made to do different things at the same time towards the same objective. One element can attack while the other one covers. One element can suppress or monitor a threat while the other prosecutes a target. One jet can hold the target area in the TGP while the other one works the radar. That is force multiplication. But it only works if the tasks are clear and the people doing them understand the plan. Delegation without context is dangerous. If you tell an element, handle that threat, but they do not know the priority, abort criteria, the desired timing, or how far they are allowed to separate, you have not really delegated, you've just created ambiguity. And ambiguity kills coordination. So when you delegate, give the task, but also give the boundaries. What do you want them to do? When do you want them to do it? How far can they go? When should they stop? When should they report back? And what are the triggers for aborting, recommitting, or rejoining? The more autonomous the task, the more important those boundaries become. Because the goal is not to create independent pilots doing their own thing. The goal is to create coordinated independence. And that's very different. But there's another side to delegation that is easy to overlook. Delegation is not only about the task. It's also about the person you give that task to. Theoretically, every pilot in the flight should be able to carry his part of the plan. But in practice, people are different. How experienced they are matters. How current they are matters. How confident they are matters. But also, whether they're fatigued matters. And how familiar they are with the mission matters. And sometimes, how someone feels that day matters more than the number of hours in his logbook. A new wingman may be 100 hours in BMS, may already be working hard just to fly formation, manage the jet, listen to the radios, operate the sensors, and not lose the picture. Giving that pilot a heavy independent task is not good delegation. That's just moving your workload onto someone who cannot carry it yet. But the opposite is just as wrong. If you have an experienced element lead with 1,000 hours in the sim, you barely give him anything to do, you're wasting one of your strongest assets. Good delegation sits between those two mistakes. Do not overload the inexperienced. Do not underuse the experienced. Delegate based on capability, experience, and current workload. And current workload is important because experience tells you what someone can probably carry in general, but it does not always tell you what he can carry today. A 1,000-hour pilot can still have a 100-hour day. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he's rusty. Maybe he's had a long week. Maybe he tells you in the briefing that he's not feeling completely sharp. As a flight lead, you need to pick up on that. That's not weakness, it's useful information. The briefing is not only where you explain the plan, it's where you read your flight. If an experienced element lead tells you before step that he's tired or not feeling 100%, maybe that's not the day you give him the most complex autonomous task in the package. That does not mean you do not trust him, it means you're listening. Maybe you still let him lead the element, but you simplify the tasking. Maybe you keep the formation a bit tighter. Maybe you avoid splitting the flight unless needed. Maybe you assign another pilot to back him up on critical part of the picture. And maybe you check in a little more often. That's not lowering standards, that's leading the actual flight you have, not the ideal flight you have imagined. A good flight lead does not only lead the battle space, he leads the people in his flight. And that leads directly into trust but verify. Delegation requires trust. If you do not trust your wingman at all, you will never delegate meaningful tasks. You will micromanage everything. You will overload yourself. And you will reduce your flight to passengers with weapons. But trust alone is not enough. Trust does not mean to stop checking. Trust does not mean you assume everything is fine until proven otherwise. Trust but verify. That phrase can sound cold, but it's not about distrust. It's about professionalism. People sometimes lose situational awareness. People sometimes miss calls. People sometimes misunderstand instructions. And that includes experienced pilots. It includes you. Verification is how you catch small problems before they become big ones. The key is to verify the things that can break the plan. Do not constantly ask for everything. Do not fill the frequency with insecurity. Do not make your element lead report every minor detail if he is already doing the job. Verification should reduce uncertainty. It should not create more comms clutter. Delegation without verification is hope, but verification without trust is micromanagement. And the sweet spot is between the two. You give real tasks, you give real responsibility, you allow people to execute, but you check the plan critical items before they become mission critical failures. That is what trust but verify means in practice. Delegation is one of the harder things to develop correctly because it requires two things at the same time. Trust and discipline. You need to trust your wingmen enough to give them meaningful tasks, but you also need the discipline to verify the things that matter. You need to know when to hold control and when to share the load and when to let an element operate on his own. You need to understand the mission, but you also need to understand the people, because in the end, delegation is not just about tactics, it's about leadership. A weak flight lead tries to do everything himself. A careless flight lead throws tasks away and hopes they get done. But a good flight lead builds a formation where every pilot contributes to the picture, the plan, the force, and the fight. Because your flight is not just for aircraft, your flight is your weapon. Use it. If you stayed until now, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you got something out of this episode. And please give me a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it.